Morning, good people. Hope you are doing well. Okay, today I'm going to discuss about the various risk profile that we have when we are profiling investors. We first of all have to understand the kind or the amount of risk one is willing to take on when undertaking this investment journey. So I'll be taking you through how to go about identifying which risk profile uh, describes you and how now to use your risk profile to choose on the right instrument to invest into, because whatever risk profile that describes you is the one now which will determine the kind of instrument that you will be willing to put your money into. So I've been discussing about investing, and yesterday I told you investing is all about growing your wealth, and investing is quite different from savings, because I told you saving is all about making sure your money is safe somewhere and you can access it anytime you need it, maybe to purchase something or as whenever an emergency arises. But then when we look at investment, we are looking at part of your savings which you put into an asset that is appreciating in value over time. So investments and savings are two different things. So mine, I'm focusing mainly on investing. So why do people invest? Because you might be wondering, why should I invest my money instead of just leaving it to be safe in either my bank account or maybe in my safe back at home or wherever you decide to put it? Why should you now risk your money to put it into an investment and maybe you end up losing your savings? Because with any investment, there's an element of risk attached to it. So I'll try to explain the reasons behind investing. So the main goal of investing is to grow your wealth, and by doing this you end up meeting your financial goals, and it also increases your purchasing power over time, because when you invest, your money multiplies by a certain percentage depending on which asset you've invested the money into. And now that you are earning something on top of your initial capital, it's like now you are letting your money to work for you by creating more wealth for you. So that is the main reason behind people deciding to invest their money. So while at this, we will look at how to go about balancing now making those interest or profits that you want to gain on your capital vis-a-vis the risk that you'll be exposing your savings to, because there's always a balance between the returns that you want to make on your investment and the amount of risk that you are exposing your savings to, because there's this general law of investment whereby we do say the higher the risk, then you definitely will expect a greater return. But if you don't want to expose your money to any risk or maybe just moderate risk, then you should also expect lower returns. So is either way. If you want higher returns, you expose your money to a higher risk, but if you want moderate returns, you just put your money into those instruments that are quite safe, where you can hardly lose your savings. So you need, before you invest your money, you first of all need to understand your risk profile to be able to pick on the right investment vehicle to put your money into, because you can't just put your money into any instrument without understanding the various risks that are associated with that kind of investment. So first of all, you have to evaluate yourself, know exactly the amount of risk you can be able to take on. Then you can relate that with the various investment options that we have in the market. Yesterday I spoke about the different asset classes that we have, where I categorize them into two. We have the traditional instruments and we have the alternative ones. Under the traditional, we had things like equities, that is mainly stocks of listed companies. We had those income-bearing instruments like the T-bonds and T-bills and the and bonds. We had cash and these mutual funds. Then under the alternative investments, we had things like real estate, forex trading, cryptocurrency, commodities, and private equity. So you find that those traditional investments are normally considered to be bearing low risks and their returns are relatively low. But if you compare that against the alternative investments, you find that the alternative investments normally come with a higher risk, but then the returns are also a bit high. So once you've understood the amount of risk you can take on, then you'll be in a better position to decide on which instrument to put your money into. So before you consider investing in any financial instrument, you must know how much risk you are ready to take. Risk profiling is important for the determination of proper investment and asset allocation in your portfolio. A portfolio is like a mixture of instruments. You might decide, okay, let me put 10% of my savings into a mutual fund, another 20% you put it into real estate, 30% you put it into, let's say, equities. So by the time you get to the 100%, you've apportioned into the various asset classes, because all those instruments have different characteristics and they also earn different rates of return. So if you have a mix of them, you'll have some of your cash in those very safe instruments, some of your cash in those high risk instruments. So even if you are to lose part of your money, you won't lose your entire investment because you've distributed your money quite well. So the returns are average, plus the security of your investment is also average. So that is what we call having a diversified portfolio where you distribute your money into various assets. So, and this distribution is quite linked to your risk profile, because based on your willingness to take on risk, that is what will now compel you to decide on where exactly you are willing to put a large chunk of your money and where else are you not willing to put much of your savings. So all that is dependent on the risk profile of the individual investor. So every single person has a different risk profile. We are never the same, because I might be willing to take on some bit of risk. Maybe my colleague is not willing to. So we are made differently, and when it comes to investments, we also have different viewpoints. So we can hardly make the same investment decision. So before you make any investment, you have to first of all understand yourself, know exactly the kind of a person you are when it comes to investments, before now you start distributing your money or savings into the various investments that we have currently in the market. So what determines the risk profile of a person? We have quite a number of factors that shape the risk nature of an investor, and some of these we have psychological factors, we have the loss bearing capacity of an individual. We also look at the investor's age, because when you are elderly, there is no way you can be willing to take on much risk compared to someone who has just started working and they still have many more years to keep on earning from their employment, because this elderly person is looking at now planning for their retirement. So they have to save each and every coin that comes their way, and they are not willing to risk their money in these high risk investments. So the risk profile of the two, the elder and the young person, are totally different. Also, the other thing that affects the risk profile of an individual is the income and expenses of an individual, because someone who is just single might not be having so much expenses on his side as compared to a family man who has children going to school. He has maybe house helps or so many other expenses. So when it comes to now deciding on investing, the family person will invest in a totally different way as compared to the single person. So those are the factors that shape an individual's risk profile. So we'll go straight now to the 5 types of risk profile that we have when it comes to investments. And I'll start with the first one, which we call the conservative investor. The conservative investor generally is a risk-averse person who is not willing to risk their savings, or let's say investment. So they want to put their money in those investments that are considered to be totally safe, where you can't lose your initial capital, or what we call the principal amount. At the end of the investment, he needs to get back the total amount that he put in, plus maybe some little returns if that investment is bearing some fruits, so maybe some little returns. So under conservative risk profile, this is an investor who is seeking safety of his capital. He is also looking at exposing their investment to minimal risk, and also is willing to receive minimum or very low returns. So they are not mainly about the returns. For them, it's about the safety of their money. So those are the ones we call conservative investors. And when it comes to now asset allocation, when I say when you are planning your portfolio, a portfolio is a mixture of the various investment instruments that you are putting your money into. So now when it comes to now allocating your resources into the various investment options that we have, for a conservative investor, we normally advise that they put their money mainly in these fixed income debt instruments like the government bonds and the treasury bills, because those ones are considered to be very safe. Because with government bonds and the T-bills, definitely you'll be getting your money back in full, plus you get to earn interest on top. So most debt instruments are considered to be very safe, and that is what we advise most of these conservative investors to put their money into. And if they are willing to try out a bit of equities, it's mainly stocks, then maybe they can do a 10% of their portfolio can go into equities. But or generally, it's like they should put 100% of their money into debt instruments, which are guaranteed to be paid back at the maturity. Then we'll go to the second one. The second one is what we call the moderately aggressive investor. So that's the second risk profile that we are looking at. So these ones are those investors who are willing to take small level of risk for potential returns over the medium to long term. So this is an investor who is, yes, is a bit cautious with their investment, but still they are after making some returns on their investment. So they'll try to look for those instruments that are considered to be safe, but at the same time they earn something on top over the medium term to long term. These are the kind of people who can't invest long term, mainly long term, because they are not sure about the future. So they try to put in their investment in short periods of time, which they can kind of predict what will happen within that period. and at the same time they are a bit cautious, but still they want to earn something. So we normally advise for such kind of investors to balance their investment in a manner that they put like 70% of their money in debt instruments, which are considered to be safe, and you are guaranteed to get your money back, so your principal is kind of intact. Then maybe 30% of their portfolio can go into equities. So 70% in debt, 30 in equities. So that way, at least even if something was to happen to the equity, the amount put in the equities, at least they still have the 70% which was put in those debt instruments. For the conservative investor, I told you they can just put 100% of their money into debt instruments, which are guaranteed to be paid back at maturity. But for the moderately aggressive investor, moderately conservative investor, we normally advise 70% in debt, 30% in equities. Then we go to the third profile, which is the moderate investor. So moderate is an average kind of a person who is, yes, willing to take on some modest risk and also get those good returns. So when we are looking at the moderate profile, we are looking at an investor who is looking for relatively high returns over medium to long term with modest risk. So when it comes to this kind of a person, because as I've stated, it's an average investor, we normally advise they just do balance between debt and equities. So 50% of their portfolio can go into these debt instruments, which are guaranteed to be paid back, and then the other 50 he can put them into equities. So from the 50% which is in equities, which has slightly higher return compared to debt instruments, he'll be able to earn higher returns from the equity side and balance off with the moderate returns that is getting from the debt instrument. So for a moderate investor, for an investor with a moderate risk profile, we normally advise a 50-50 kind of asset allocation, 15 debt instruments, 15 equities. The fourth profile is the moderately aggressive investor. Now we are moving from the conservative to the aggressive one. So this one is not that purely aggressive, it's a moderately kind of an aggressive investor. So for this kind of profile, this is an investor who is seeking to maximize returns over medium to long term with high risk. So for him, the kind of asset allocation we are looking at, we will do like a 70 to 90% equity, then the other 10 or maybe 10 to 30 can go into debt instruments. So this is the other way around from the moderately conservative. So the moderately conservative investor, we said he can put like 10 to 30 in equities, then 70% can go into debt instruments, so that at least 3/4 of their portfolio is secure. So he's only exposing the 30% to the high risk instruments under the equity section. But now for the moderately aggressive investor, we are doing the other way around. For him, he can put now 70 to 90% in equities, and then maybe 10 to 30% can go into debt instruments. So because a huge portion of his investment is in equities, which earns higher returns, it will give him high returns compared to the moderate or conservative investor. So that is for the moderately aggressive investor. 70 to 90% in equities, 10 to 30% in debt instruments. And the last profile is the aggressive investor. This is an investor who is willing to take significant risk to maximize returns over the long term. For the moderately aggressive investor, we are looking at someone who is looking at the medium term to long term. But when it comes to the purely aggressive investor, for them they are willing to do long term investment. Even if the future is not guaranteed, for them they are willing to take on that risk as long as they make those good returns. So this is a person who can lock in their investment for even 2, 3, 5 years or even 10 years without being bothered about the uncertainties that come with the future. So for this kind of investor, it's like the opposite of the conservative investor, because the conservative investor, I told you, they can just do 0 to 10% in equities and maybe 90 to 100% of, let's say just 100% of their money in debt instruments. But now for the aggressive one, we are doing the other way around. They can put 100% of their money in equities, which will give them high returns, and then do maybe 0 to 10% in debt instruments. So for them, their main investment is in equities, which are guaranteed to give them high returns. But then with equities, because they are influenced by forces of supply and demand, so the prices keep on fluctuating, so the risk is quite high, but then the returns are also high. So for the aggressive investor, they can do purely equities. So those are the 5 main classifications of investors when it comes to profiling, to risk profiling. We have the conservative, moderately conservative, we have the moderate, we have the moderately aggressive, and then we have the aggressive investor. So you should gauge yourself to understand exactly which risk profile applies to you. Now once you know which category you fall into, then that one will guide you on picking on the right investment vehicle or instrument to give you that return. Because that's why yesterday I was talking about investment objectives, because when you are looking at investment objectives, it's that goal that you want to achieve with your investment. You either want to put your money into an investment that will be giving you constant income, maybe on a monthly basis, quarterly or semi-annual. And then there are those people who are only looking at capital gains, so they just want their capital to grow. They are not looking at constant income, maybe on a monthly or whichever frequency. For them, they are only focusing on the capitalization. So once you, and there are those ones who are only after making sure their money is safe. So once you know what objective you are looking at, and then you do your own risk profiling, or maybe you sit down with a financial advisor who will assist you with profiling yourself, then now from that, when you combine your objective and your risk profile, you'll now be able to pick on the right investment vehicle to put your money into. And just a summary, your risk profile may change over time depending on changes in your life cycle, because maybe you are young, then you lead on to becoming an elderly person. So along the way, your risk appetite keeps on changing, because when you are young and maybe just newly employed, you still have that leeway or freedom to take on higher risk. But then when you are near in your retirement age, then you have to be cautious with your savings, because you can't just expose your money to high risk. Because what if you end up losing your money and yet you are at 60? You don't have much time to recover from that loss. But for someone who is at 25, even if they were to lose part of their investment at that age, they still have time to work and recover that loss. So your risk profile keeps on changing based on various circumstances in your life. Maybe you are still single. When you get married, you kind of change your outlook to on these issues of risk and investment. So you have to keep on reevaluating yourself and doing those changes in your portfolio, because once you realize that, okay, I can't take on much risk, then you try to move your investments from those high risk instruments to those ones which are considered to be quite safe. So in summary, that's what I had for you today. Thank you for your continued viewing and for the support. Thank you and God bless. See you in the next topic. Bye.